Hey, it's Michael, and I've got a question for you, but it's not the typical type of question that I ask before these episodes. My question for you now is, would you consider signing up for my newsletter, The Follow-Up? I send out the follow-up on the 15th of each month, so it's a monthly newsletter, and I usually cover topics that we cover here on the show with the guests that I have on, but I also cover things like how to communicate well, how to overcome conflict in your everyday interactions. I dive deeper into my thoughts on the topics that I discuss here on the show with my guests in a way that I really don't get into during the episodes because, again, as the show says, as the show's title is, this is the follow-up question, and I see my role during those interviews mostly as asking questions and getting out of my guest's way. But if you want more thoughts from me, if you want to hear my take on any particular issue that happens to be front of mind for me or covered in recent episodes, then please consider subscribing to the follow-up newsletter. The link is in the show notes. You can also go to my website, michaelashford.com/newsletter, and sign up there. I'd love to see you there. And just as a heads up, when my book releases, hopefully, knock on wood, this fall, the people on my newsletter will be the first to know about the pre-order. So go check it out and join me. Join me on the follow-up, the newsletter. So with that, let's get into this episode. Welcome to the follow-up question. I'm your host, Michael Ashford. Come with me on a journey as I explore how we communicate well. What we have been taught about communication and what has been modeled and incentivized through culture has left us in a place where we know how to exert our ideas and opinions and beliefs onto each other, but we miss the entire other half of conversation, the extraction. My aim with this show is to bring you perspectives and ways of looking at issues or topics that perhaps you haven't considered before, to teach you how to ask curious questions, how to seek understanding over certainty, how to listen and give space, so that ultimately you might become a better communicator. I'm a former journalist who believes everyone has a story to tell, and it's only when we ask questions and listen that we reveal what connects us as humans, our dreams, our desires, our experiences, our ideas, and what we stand for rather than what we are against. As I say in the intro for this podcast, my goal is to help you communicate well with others. It's important to me because understanding what good communication looks like and sounds like is a prerequisite to being able to find common ground and overcome conflict. We have to understand how to talk to each other. And honestly, you likely weren't taught how to do this. I'm not saying I'm the end-all be-all, but this is not something that was taught in school, and it's certainly not modeled well in our culture that rewards hot takes and sick burns. In what I call the psychology of conflict communication, which my book that I'm writing is going to be about, the ability to communicate well with others follows the framework of first, asking questions of yourself, then asking questions about others, and finally, asking questions of others. In this episode, the focus is on the first step, asking questions of yourself. Understanding yourself better by exploring the makeup of your ideas and beliefs about the way the world works, or perhaps even the way the world should work to you. It is a must if you are to have better, more productive, more actionable conversations when conflict is present. And often, this soul-searching work creates a psychological safety that allows you to show up more confidently as yourself in all situations, so that other people's views don't feel so threatening to you. My guest this week is Mariama Whyte, a singer and actress who was a part of the Broadway National Tours for The Lion King and The Color Purple. I met Mariama in the months leading up to the TEDxManitouSprings Fluidity Event that was held on December 3rd, 2022, during which she delivered her talk titled, how to trust your voice and speak with confidence anywhere. I encourage you to listen to Mariama's TEDx talk for a bit of added context to our conversation, and the link is in the show notes. But as soon as Mariama finished her talk, I knew I wanted to have her on this podcast. During my conversation with Mariama, she explained what it looks like to do the deep work of figuring out how you best show up in the world, and how it fuels into her belief that we're here not to just be, but to become. So you said something in your TEDx talk, Mariama, that I want to explore with you a little bit. It immediately stuck out to me when I heard it the first time. You said that at one point, and you have struggled in your life being stuck between the desire to express my ideas and the reasons I came up with to keep those ideas to myself.
Yes.
I think in hearing that, if I recall the conversations that I have with people, that is such a holdup for people. This desire to want to express yourself in your most authentic way, but we have all these things in the back of our mind that tell us, don't do that. It's dangerous. You're going to get, we come up with all these reasons. So Mariama, I want to start here. What were your reasons? What were the reasons you were telling yourself that you were not supposed to express yourself in the ways that you wanted to? Does that question make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And I'm going back to that part in my TEDx where even as I was writing the TEDx, I was to try to stay within the confines of the time between, 15 and 18 minutes. I had a whole list of all the reasons, because I remember when I was in early high school, some middle school, but primarily in high school, there were these times where I felt I had so much to say. Oh my gosh, I always have a lot to say. But I was sitting there in a lot of these classes, and if people go to my TEDx, they'll find out more about what this was. But in classes where I didn't feel as comfortable, I did not feel, I myself, within myself, knew that I had a lot of great things to say, but I was in a space that felt very unfamiliar. I was one of a few Black students in these classes where prior to that, that was not my experience. I was surrounded by my friends, and as I matriculated up into quote unquote upper level classes, I felt very alone. And I felt very alone because I just wasn't friends. I just did not have. Uh, I felt a sense of culture shock. I felt a very, very strong sense of separation from the people in the class. And so it was this feeling of stuckness. Here I am, this extremely expressive person in my creative artistic spaces. But when I'm sitting there in a more intellectual academic space where, although I knew my ideas were very valuable to me, suddenly I became paranoid and wondering, oh my goodness, we don't speak the same. We don't have the same, we don't talk the same, we don't communicate in the same way. And in my mind, I was thinking, they sound so much smarter than me. I knew I was very, very smart, but there was like a language barrier. There was also this thought of, I also too had a stutter. Sometimes I still stutter. It comes up every now and then if I'm talking way too fast. And I have a lot of thoughts in my head. If I just don't slow down and just be able to breathe and make sure that I'm nice and centered, sometimes I can still develop this stutter. It doesn't happen very often. But when I was younger, I would get so nervous that the stutter would come. And I was afraid that if I spoke and the stutter would happen, I would be highly embarrassed by that too. So there was that. There was this idea of, well, I don't feel like I sound as smart as they do. There was also this idea of just, I didn't like the idea of people just staring at me. I like being, if I had on a costume and I was singing a song and I was on stage, that I had no anxiety there. It's so interesting. I had no anxiety there, but more in a quiet space where you have to articulate your thoughts in a way that, for me, I felt like if these thoughts don't come out the right way in my mind, the right way, then I'm just going to stay silent. I'm just going to stay silent and I'm just going to listen. I also knew too, and I still know, that so much of the way that I naturally express myself freely was through my writing and through performing. So sometimes I would sit there and go, you know what? I'm just going to write this paper. This paper is going to be amazing. I don't have to say anything. I'm just going to write the paper and I'm going to be really good at writing, or just put me on stage and I'll be great there. So for me, it was this feeling of not knowing if my ideas would be welcomed and valued, if I personally would be embarrassed by how my words came out. And just the setting of it, just kind of sitting and having to have that think time and listen. I was used to moving and doing stuff. So it was those reasons. They don't sound like me. I don't sound like them. And also, I don't know them. They don't know me. We didn't know each other. I know a lot of them now as I've gotten older. But it was this, a lot of it is, what's that quote? I might not say it verbatim, but it's, we fear what we don't know, or what we don't understand. So it was a lot of this fear of, I don't quite know. I'm not quite comfortable in this environment yet. I don't know who I really am. I'm trying to fit in. I'm this young girl who am I here? I knew who I was in other settings. I was very free and expressive. But here, it felt I felt very alone. And so, of course, when we feel alone, we tend to isolate ourselves even more and become even more quiet.
Mariama, what did you need? Like, what would have changed that experience for you all those years ago?
I think it's interesting. I think now, as we're moving into different spaces, there's so much more conversation now around um, uh, culture, different cultures and diversity. There's the diversity and equity and inclusion conversation. There's all of this going on now, but I feel that possibly what I needed was some type of transition, and I don't think teachers might have known that students needed this, but some type of transition between my years from elementary school into middle school and high school. When you're coming from one environment that's very, very comfortable, I'm doing very, very well, and then all of a sudden well, just you're just in a middle school. Everybody's in a different space. Everybody's learning new people. You're in new environments. You're in new classes, new teachers. All of that is, on one hand, is extremely exciting. On another hand, is like, oh my gosh, where am I? And where are my friends? I want my friends. I'm the type, I love my friends. I need my friends close to me. And for me, it was challenging to not have some kind of transition, some type of support to transition me into that. I don't know exactly what that would have looked like. And it could have also been too, I will say this, that particular class, my 12th grade English class, was my favorite English class. I really enjoyed that class. We read some amazing books and the discussions were great. I contributed sometimes, not all the time, but the discussions were really great. And there was one time I remember, of course, these are the things I can't put all in the talk, but I remember feeling so down on myself for not speaking up about, I can't remember what the topic was, but I started crying in class. I don't think any of the students saw me, but I went to the teacher. He was my favorite teacher in high school, Mr. Vargo, rest his soul. He was my favorite English teacher. And I went to him and I said, I'm just so scared. I'm just scared to speak. He said, why? And I let him know. I don't know if I told him all the specifics, but I just said, I have all these really cool things to say, but I'm just really afraid to say them. And I remember he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "It's okay. It's okay." He said, "If you don't want to speak, you don't have to." And I remember him saying, "And when you're ready, you will." And I was like, wow. And just him and me even having the getting the courage just to open myself up that way to him. Now I see it as courage. Then I was just like, I was so distraught. I was like, I just feel so, so lonely. And he just looked me in my eye and he said, "You're okay. You're fine." And just that, it was so comforting. That was probably what I needed. Earlier on, I remember telling my mother when I was in elementary school how afraid I was to be able to speak in front of my class and do a presentation. She said, "Oh, you'll be fine. Just do it as a skit." But it's just those very small moments that make a huge difference. Make a huge difference in saying, "You're fine." Having someone else say that, I couldn't quite say it to myself then at the time. But hearing him say that really just gave me such a sense of comfort and reassurance that whatever I have to say, I can say it. And however I say it, it's fine. However it comes out, as long as I say it, it will be fine. There's this, I think, I was thinking about this quote earlier today that is one of my favorite quotes. And possibly if I heard this quote years ago, I would have gone, "Oh, okay, but I had to write it down because I did not want to misspeak. The great late Audre Lorde, amazing thought leader, author, poet. She says in one of her passages, she says, "When we speak, we are afraid. Our words will not be heard or welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak." I was like, oh man, if I heard that back then, I probably would have spoken up a little bit more. But it's those moments, those kind of quiet moments of saying you're okay. And it is true. Even when we are silent, we're afraid. When we speak up, we're still afraid, but it's having that courage to just kind of say, just giving yourself a nudge to say, even if it's one word, you don't have to give a whole paragraph, you don't have to give a whole dissertation, just allowing yourself to just jump in real quick just to see how that feels. Because I do believe that uncomfortable, even if we feel uncomfortable, when we give ourselves the courage, we give ourselves that just do it. Oh my gosh, it does so amazing. It's just so many amazing things for our confidence just to take one small step, just to take one small step. So I think now there are definitely more things in place for students, for people in the workplace to feel psychologically
Yeah.
safe. That have been implemented from the outside, but also for us as individuals to develop to develop that safety within ourselves in order to be able to speak even when we are afraid. Do it afraid.
Have you
Yeah.
explored the question rolling around in my mind is have you explored what had been true in your life that led you to enter that unknown situation? And I'll use the word default. I don't know if that's the correct phrasing, but default to feeling psychologically unsafe versus perhaps psychologically excited about the newness of the situation. What had been
Mm,
true for you that transition that you talked about gave you that feeling of psychological unsafety?
mm. I think some of it is my personality. I'm naturally introverted.
Mhm.
So I feel sometimes I can feel a lot of, uh, I can absorb a lot. I can absorb a lot just by sitting and observing. Naturally introverted. A lot of times people feel like introversion means that you're just a quiet person. It's not necessarily that. Um, it's it is a sense of reserve, but also it's a sense of not necessarily having to speak all the time, you know. in a way that's verbal. My way of expressing myself comes in a lot of different forms. So I think some of that is personality. But I think also, too, for me, it really was so to kind of give some history as a young girl. I was born in Columbus. My parents were very adamant about giving me and my sister African names, very, very, very much into our Africanness. So my name is Mariama. Her name is Miata. We went to a school that was, we used to use the term a lot more back then, Afrocentric,
Mm-hmm.
growing up in this space. So I was surrounded, and then over time, at a short amount of time, I lived in California, and I was at a Afrocentric school there. And then when I went to elementary school, it was a primarily Black elementary school. So I had a lot of experience just being, and it wasn't like, of course, I wasn't around other cultures, but there was just this, I was very, very, very much rooted in such a sense of pride in who I was and who I am culturally. Um, and so that's like what I learned, what I saw. I learned all this history about myself. And then I go into spaces where, and of course, with my friends at my elementary school, I mean, we just had so much excitement and pride about learning. We were always so proud of each other. And we just loved everything that we did. I mean, we did school plays. I got into athletics pretty early. I just had a lot of, like, that was just my experience. Went to this neighborhood school. Everybody in the neighborhood was Black. We were just all Black. and and it was wonderful. And then so as I am placed into upper level classes, we were all separated. Everybody was separated simply because we were going to middle school, right? So everybody is going into different classes and things like that. But I looked around and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not with my friends. And these were in the more, let's say, like English, sciences, eventually math and things like that. So I took orchestra, I took all these other classes as well, where it was more mixed group classes. But in some of these honors and AP courses, it was just like, where are my friends? Where are my friends? That's what it felt like. So that my default was really like, I feel lonely. I don't even know if it was because I was surrounded by white people. I don't even think it was that. It was just like, I don't know. I don't know anyone here. So I think for me to really feel like I'm thriving, um, is when I feel comfortable, when I feel safe, and also feel challenged as well. I definitely felt challenged. My elementary school, they challenged us. They had so many high expectations of us. We thought we could do anything, like anything, and we could do anything. Um, and so I think what it was just such a different experience for me. It was just so. Um, it was culturally just very, very, very different. And so again, it was that space of, this feels very, very new. I have not been here before. How do I
Mm-hmm.
navigate who I am, and how can I feel like myself? How I feel like myself in other situations. How do I do that in this new space? So I think that had a lot to do with it. My father even asked me before I did the TEDx talk, and I was telling him about it. He was like, I don't understand. How did you feel, like you weren't really adequate? Your mother and I, we gave you such a sense of pride in who you are, just who you are, not necessarily just me being a Black girl, but it was just like, who you are, your spirit, your soul, your inner self. And I was like, yeah, I understand. I was like, but I was in middle school, Daddy. Like, everybody wants to fit,
Middle school is so
everybody wants to
hard.
figure out. Yeah. It's like, oh my gosh. And your hormones are changing. Like, all
Yeah.
of these things are happening. You're like, where do I belong? Where do I belong? And so I think it was so, and I don't even know if I don't think I even shared much about how I felt at the
Yeah.
time. I was just going through it. I might have talked to my mother about it a little bit, but I don't think I even shared much with her then. I really just kind of and also too, I did well. I wrote those papers. I did well on those papers. So it was like I got good grades. So it was like, okay, well, I just won't talk, but I'll do my papers and I'll get good grades and I'll do fine. So I really feel like a lot of that was, it was just so
Yeah.
different. It was so different. Yeah. Yeah. And it's really, as an adult, to be able to look back at who I was then. Although it was uncomfortable, it was very healing to write the TEDx and to actually
Mm-hmm.
release it. Um, but to be able to look back at who I was then, excuse me, and who I have become, I am so glad that I went through those experiences, because it challenged me. At some point, I was like, you know what? Am I going to go through life like this, being silent here and not here on stage? Or, I had to figure out, who am I going to be everywhere, anywhere? I don't want to dim my light just because I feel uncomfortable here. I need to shine my light everywhere I go. So I learned that. It was an English class in my sophomore year in college. I said, you know what? I am so sick of myself. I am tired. It's exhausting. It is exhausting to literally, because I would feel it. I would feel it when I would walk into these rooms, into these classrooms. I would feel the difference. I would feel the difference of who I am. And I'm like, you know what? I'm tired. So that's when I sought a speech therapist and I said, please help me, because I thought something was wrong with me. I really did. I was like, what is wrong with me? She said, there's nothing wrong with you. There are just certain practices and belief systems. It's all about what you believe about yourself. And also realizing too that at the end of the day, what if you place more value on what other people are going to say, or what else is going to happen, or the outcome of what's going to happen after you speak, more than the value of what you actually have to say, then we're always going to be we're always going to be like, oh, everything out there is better. Everything out there is more valuable. No, what I have to say and what I've always had to say has been valuable, just as valuable as everything everyone else has had to say. So I'm grateful for the experience. It challenged me. And I like challenges.
This is fascinating, because I have heard recently in several other interviews that I've done, is this notion of when we are pulled out of our first vision or definition of home. And you even touched on this in your TEDx talk.
Yeah.
When we are pulled out of and transition away from what home became for us as a young child, or however we defined it very
Yes.
early on. And home doesn't have to be the house that we grew up in. It can be the neighborhood.
Right.
It can be the
Right.
school with friends. That the little idiosyncrasies of the things that we struggle with begin to rear their heads.
Yes.
And it is that transition that you just described, and that I've heard several times now from other people who have gone through very similar situations. That's when trauma arises. That's when we struggle with who we are. That's where those feelings of not just psychological unsafety, but physical unsafety begin to paralyze us.
Yes.
Before I ask a question, Mariama, something just popped in my mind. Are you familiar with the Enneagram?
Yes. Yes.
Are you a 6?
And I need to do it again. I have to do it again, Michael. I have to do it again. Because I cannot
see
remember.
A 6 or a 4, but
I can't remember. I have to go back and I have to do all of these, all these different platforms and ways for you to really find out who you are. But I have to go back and I'll let you know. I'll follow up with you.
We won't go there for right now. But did what I say make sense to you? Does that resonate in that feeling of being taken away from home? That the feelings that you experienced, in particular, what we're talking about, psychological unsafety, and you even said it in your talk that it feels physically unsafe. Does that ring true for you?
It does. It does. I remember sitting there in silence, my stomach hurting. Sometimes I would I would just zone out because I didn't want to feel so uncomfortable. Most of my physical reaction would be my stomach. And sometimes my heart would beat really,
Well,
really
and you said you
fast. I
cried. You
would
cried in
hold.
class too. Yeah.
Yes, I
Yeah.
cried. I cried. I had to wait till everybody else left. I was like, I don't want to see anybody else, seeing me cry. And also, I would hold my breath. These are things that I realized once I took speech therapy. I didn't realize I was doing until she brought it to my attention. I said, oh my
Mhm.
goodness. She would be telling me something, and she says, you know what? I'm going to stop talking and let you know that you're holding your breath right now. I said, I am? She said, so let's breathe. And I was like, oh, okay. Because we don't, until someone tells us, is aware enough and knowledgeable enough to really know what's going on, they can see it and they can say, you know what? Let's stop. Let's pause. Let's deal with this. So there were so many different things that I didn't even know. I couldn't really, I just knew I had a physical reaction to this feeling of loneliness and feeling threatened. It's like, you know what? I feel so threatened right now, so I'm just going to stay
Mhm.
silent. Some people are very aggressive. Some people run out of the room. Everyone has a different way of dealing with it. But yes, I personally had very physical reactions, and it's something when you don't, when you're not, especially when you're young, you're like, you look at it as something being wrong with you, and it is not. It's our hardwired nature to want to belong. And so when we don't feel comfortable, our body goes into this either fight, flight, or freeze mode. And so, what I even say in the TEDx talk is when we can figure out, okay, let's look at the environment. We may feel unsafe, but wait, let's look, are we actually safe? And when we can see that we are safe, there's no one harming me, there's no one, then we can start to really go into ourselves and go into our body and go, you know what? Let me take a deep breath. Let me feel that, whatever I need to do that to feel that sense of home within myself in order to express myself. Yeah, but I definitely feel that all that resonates with me. Those physical things that would happen were very, very real, very, very real. And I thought, it's interesting, before I did the talk, just sharing people with this idea that I had, it resonates with a lot of people, no matter what their cultural background is. I'm sure, people that you've talked to, we all kind of deal with it in some
Mhm.
way. The scenario may be
Yeah.
different, but we all have these things that will trigger these feelings of anxiety within us. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned
Hmm.
it earlier. You kind of in passing. You mentioned how we show up at work, how
Hmm.
we, and I'll add to it, how we show up in conversations where we disagree. Things get heated. Um,
Yes.
we certainly have enough of that right now. but
Oh my goodness, so much of it.
but Mariama, what you've learned, and you've gone through therapy, you've explored a lot of this in yourself. With what you've learned, what are the ramifications of not addressing these feelings of psychological unsafety at work, in conversations where we disagree, with friends who, maybe they've changed from who we knew them to be as kids?
Hmm.
What are the ramifications if we don't address these things in ourselves?
Hmm. The ramifications, for one, will stay the same. We will stay the same. We will stay, that energy will stay stored inside of us. And we don't know how it may come out later. We don't know how it may rear its head later on down the line. It is important that we really go inside ourselves and seek help. It is very, very important, because there's there's so much that we can, just within our own minds, make up about ourselves, if we do not release it, if we do not talk about it, if we do not say, you know what, this is how I'm feeling. And we also have we have to be careful not to judge ourselves either. We put a lot of things on. We put a lot of, oh, this is such a bad feeling, or this is this. It's just what it is. And if we don't address the things that make us uncomfortable, that make us feel like we can't get to that next level in our life, we are going to stay the same. And I'll just talk more about my experience when I decided to seek therapy. That was my thought. I said, if I don't do something about this, I'm just going to stay like this. I'm just going to stay like this. And who wants to stay uncomfortable for the rest of my life? And I had dreams. That's the thing too. Oh gosh, I wish I knew this quote. I'm going to try to say it verbatim. Lisa Nichols, amazing speaker, transformational speaker. She says something to the effect of, the distance between where you are now and where you want to be in your life, or the distance between where you are now and where you want to go, is your language, is how you communicate. I just saw that, I don't know, a couple of years ago, and I was like, oh, that's really good. That's what I knew. That was what was happening to me when I decided to make a change. Because I saw myself as this very confident communicator, and I had experience with that in other situations. So I'm like, if I can do it over here, I know I can do it over here. I just need to find what that is within myself that is making me so afraid, and being able to lay that out for somebody, and so that they can see me and go, you know what, this is what we need to do in order for you to feel confident everywhere. And confident, of course, that's a word that some people, confidence comes from practice. Confidence comes from having the courage to be able to do something again and again and again. A lot of times people think, oh, I'm not confident. You can be confident in one thing and not so confident in another, simply because you have not put the practice
It's not
in.
a binary.
You
It's
haven't
not a
put
trait. It's a
ex-
practice. Yeah.
exactly. It's a practice. It is a practice. And once I realized that, I said, you know what? It's, Mariama, it's just because you have not practiced enough. You sat there in silence and you decided not to speak. It was a decision that I made, but the feelings were so strong. I was like, okay, that began to overpower my decision to speak. So I said, you know what? I'm just going to stay like this. And I believe that the reason we have to speak, and I mean, we have so many different ways we express ourselves. Me personally, I write, I sing, I perform, I do all types of, I have a lot of different voices, So I don't want, if people are listening, to say that speaking is the only way to be able to communicate. There's so many different ways to communicate. But when we speak, we must speak at work. We must speak within our relationships. We must speak to our children. We must speak just going out and being in the world. We have to verbalize what we're feeling. And if we don't get to that place where we go inside ourselves and go, you know what, I'm afraid in this moment, what can I do? If I don't want to stay here, if I really want to change, either I need to seek help, or I need to find the courage to just take that small step and then do it again and do it again and do it again. And the ramifications are, we'll just continue to be who we are. And I believe that we are not supposed to stay the same. I believe we're supposed to change, and we are supposed to evolve. And I wish I could remember what I said in the TEDx. I said, something of the idea of, we must speak so we can personally witness our own growth, our evolution, and knowledge of who we are. That's what I said. Yes.
You got it. You pulled it out.
Yes. And that, for me, that I had dreams. I wanted to do Broadway shows. I wanted to be able to speak here and there. But if I did not get that, if I did not sit with myself long enough and get the help, I don't know if I would have been able to do what I have done in my life. I had to be able to communicate who I am, who I was, everywhere, or else I would stay the same.
You hit on something there that I have been exploring as well recently, which is this idea of, can people change? And your answer to that tells me a lot about your ability to communicate with others, your ability to find common ground. But I want to ask you this, because I'm getting the sense. Well, let me just ask the question, and you can take it where you go. Do you believe we have an obligation to change as human beings?
Mm, I wouldn't call it an obligation. I think it's our
Oh,
birthright.
please tell me more.
Well, I think about how we are as babies. Like when we come in this world, most of the time babies come, they're just free. They're like, hey, here I am. They get a little older. They start talking, look at me, look at me. Hey, look at me. Look at me, mom. Look at me, dad. Whoever's taking care of them, they want people to see them,
Yeah.
you know? And then over time, things change where we become more self-conscious. We change based on outside experiences. So we just naturally change. We grow, our brain grows, all types of things happen internally and externally. But I believe that it's not only our obligation to change, but it is our birthright. Simply because so much of, and when I say change, like
Hmm.
internally, the internal changes are important. A lot of people want to change what they look like and how they look and everything, and that's wonderful if you want to look a little different. But I believe the most important change is who you are and who you become. I believe that we are here to not just be, but to become. And in order to become, that requires change. It's this idea of being able to be present in the moment, but also knowing that as you grow and as you want to move on in your life in the future, there are things that you are going to have to change. There are ideas that you're going to have to unlearn. There are ideas that you're going to have to learn. There are belief systems that you'll have to dispel, and other belief systems, other beliefs about yourself that you'll have to cultivate. I believe that when we change, because I know that I have changed. I know that I have. I know that I have. I know that I have. And I have people in my life that I know have changed as well. Sometimes you see people 20 years down the line and you see what they're doing, and you're like, "Oh my God, I did not even see you doing." I remember going to my 10th year high school reunion and people going, "You're doing the Lion King? I didn't even know you want to do that." I kept a lot to myself about my dreams. but but they saw me. I was very outgoing. I played sports. I was in an orchestra or whatever. But some of these people were in my classes and they saw me as a very quiet person. They're like, "What? When did this happen? How did I not see?" And it's because I changed. I changed direction. I changed my mind about myself. I believe that people I do believe that it is not just an obligation, but it's also our birthright to change. We are here to be and to become. And we all have potential to become the most amazing, full expressions of who we are born to be. And so that's why I do believe that it is an obligation. And I believe that's why people get frustrated.
Hmm.
People become frustrated with where they are because I believe everybody has this desire, this innate desire to grow and to evolve. I mean, we're from the earth. The earth evolves. We're supposed to. And so I believe that's why people get frustrated with themselves because they know deep inside there's more. I am more. But they don't know if they're not quite sure. It's not even if they're sure if they have the tools. They may not have had access to the tools in order to grow into who they are. And that's why I think support is so very important because we can't do it on we there's just only so much we can do on our own. Yeah.
And I definitely want to ask you about The Lion King and going on, the Broadway National Tour with that and The Color Purple. But before I do, you said something that brought up a question in my mind, Mariama. What is the greatest thing that you have had to unlearn? What's the greatest lesson that you have had to unlearn over
Ooh,
the course of your life?
the greatest lesson that I have had to unlearn. Ooh, that's a question for you. Um, I think this is a matter of learning and unlearning for me. as a kid and as a grown woman, still evolving, I've always been a dreamer. I've seen things and I'm like, you know what? I can do that. I'm gonna do whatever I'm gonna do in order to do that. Whatever it is. As a young person, so much of my as an early performer in my career, so much of it was about career, career, career. I'm gonna do Broadway, I'm gonna do this, and I'm gonna do that, and some of the things I definitely have done, and I still have some more to do. But I think what I had to unlearn was that, or had to really hone in on, is that career is one thing, but purpose for me is more important and more valuable than what my career will ever look like. So it's, for me, my purpose drives me much more than my career does, or what I think my career should look like. When I stopped doing The Color Purple back in 2008, it was because I was on the road with my son. He was a baby at the time. He was a year and a half. And I was like, you know what? We've been on the road together. It's time for me to sit down. It was very, very tough for me to be on the road and have to hire new people to watch him and all of these things. And I remember that was a moment of really, real unlearning for me, because I had to stop and think, okay, can I keep going on with this? Or should I keep going on with this? Because a lot of people say, well, you can just keep doing that. It's great money and all this stuff. You know, your baby will be fine. Just send him home. And I'll be like, I don't want to leave my baby. He has to stay with me and I have to stay with him. That was a huge unlearning experience for me, because I had to shed my expectations of what my career was going to look like. I had to completely unlearn and be okay with my dreams and everything that I thought I'm gonna do this at this age, and this at this age, and this at this age, and this at this age. All of that, all these expectations that I had. And I had to stop and go, you know what? I have a whole soul to take care of now. And that, he's a huge part of my purpose. And so I had to learn how to not just, I had to really embrace newness, embrace the fact that, like, you know, you have dreams, but they may not happen the way that you want to. But in all of it, it's like, if I can stay in that idea of, Mariama, what is your purpose in all that you do? Regardless of what it is, regardless if it's a Broadway show or a TEDx talk or maybe a book that I write or this, I stay connected to my purpose. And so much of my purpose is about upliftment, empowering, and healing. So I do that through everything that I do. So letting go of expectations, unlearning what I thought those expectations would be, and really, really embracing purpose.
You know, I can't let you get out of here without asking you, what is your purpose, Mariama? How do you define it?
Yes. Well, I would say, for one, I am a creator. I believe we all are creators. We all are here to create our lives. A lot of us have been maybe disconnected from our creative side of who we are, but we all really do create our lives. That is who I am at my core. And that's who I love. That's what I love to always remember about myself. I'm not just an actor or a person to perform a role. I am a creator, a creator. Within my creations, whether that is music, whether that is a talk, whether that is a show, everything that I do, even if I'm not trying, everything that I do and what I hear from other people, because sometimes I have to hear what other people say about my work in order for me to really, really hone in on what my purpose is. People tell me I'm inspiring, my work is healing, and it's empowering. So I think all of the, and I love to educate. So I think all of that is wrapped up in My purpose is wrapped up in all of those things. And the package may look different. Mm-hmm. The actual package of how I give those messages and empower and heal and inspire and educate, they may look a little bit different from one to the next, but my purpose here is to uplift and to inspire and to heal and to educate.
Wonderful. So let's talk Broadway for just a few moments here. The Broadway National Tour of The Lion King and The Color Purple. How did everything we've talked about, what was it about the stage that brought you, I'll use the phrase brought you out of your shell, but maybe perhaps the better way to phrase it is like gave you life. You said in your TEDx talk to use your imagination to your advantage, to that performing was about exploring, taking risks and exploring creativity. What was it about the stage that brought that out of you?
Oh, the thing about the stage and just being in that space is you're completely uninhibited. The stage is a place, and the theater especially, it's a safe space. It is a safe space. I remember just being a younger child going to acting lessons. My teacher would say, God rest her soul, she would say, this is a safe space. Just saying safe space was so powerful. And she would just say, this is a safe space to just be whoever you want to be. So it was that part of me that in some ways where I feel kind of shy and uninhibited, I'm like, oh, I can just do whatever I want to do here. I can dance, I can sing, I can act, I can play. I can eventually, I did music and all of these things. So it's something about the stage, being able to be on a stage in front of people.
Which a lot of people would not say is a safe space.
Exactly. Right. For me, it was a vehicle for me to unleash this, just to unleash this very, very expressive child. I was always dancing around the house and singing and acting, and also too, I must acknowledge my aunt, my mother's sister, Diane McIntyre, is a world-renowned choreographer and dancer and director. So so she was my first artistic inspiration. So I had it in the family. It's like, it's honest. I got it honest. It's in the blood. But when I was younger, my parents would take us up to New York and go see her amazing performances. And she had a dance company called Sounds in Motion. And although modern dance was not the area that I went, I would just go and I would see my aunt literally fly on stage, fly on stage and see her dancers. And I'm like, wow, look at all of this amazing work that she created. And something was so powerful about that too, because I would see her on the stage, but I would also see her at home and we would just talk and hang out, and we still do, So I think for me, it was so inspiring and it was real. I was like, I can do this because my aunt does it. My aunt has done it and she does it. And so for me, it became the stage was where, when I get on stage, there is something I can't even explain it. I can't explain it. Whether I'm singing, acting, speaking, when I get on stage and I'm able to share who I am in a creative way, that feels like home. That feels like home. And so that for me, it feels like home. I have so much joy around that. And that's something that came very, very, very natural for me. It wasn't anything that I had to like work up to figure out, to find. For some people that can be very, you're like, oh, I don't want to do that. But for me, it felt very, very safe and freeing, very, very liberating. And I love to be able to be in that space. Mm-hmm.
And like I said, that's not for everyone, the stage, but
right,
like you said in your talk, find your definition of home. I think that's exactly. A beautiful place to.
It's different for everybody. Yes.
Mariama, last question for you here. What is a question that you wish you were asked more?
Ooh. What is a question that I wish I was asked more? I would say, what do you like to do in your free time?
I'll ask the
I
question. What
think
do
I
you like to
would.
do in your free time?
Okay. The reason I
Yeah,
say that is because so many people see me in a public
mhm,
way. So they're just like, you're always busy. You're always doing this. You're always doing that. And I'm like, not all the time. Not all the time. Um, but my free time, I'm a mother. That's a huge, 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 huge part of who I am. So I love to spend time with my son. We watch movies. We like going bike riding, in the summertime when the weather.
of
I'm in
course, yeah.
Cleveland, so it's not right. It's not so warm right now. I like to cuddle up and read a book. I like to talk to my friends. I like to go out and just be, not be the public person or not have any expectations. I really enjoy, time with my family. I'm very, very family oriented. I like to laugh, you know. Um, Sometimes so much of my energy is setting goals. What's the next goal? What's the next dream? What's the this? And so when I have time to just be able to be, I like to spend time with my family, with my friends, and just be. But that's usually a question most people don't ask because it's usually about the
Yeah,
doing of all the other things that I
for
do.
sure.
Yeah.
What's the best movie that you've seen recently?
Ooh. Oh my goodness. I haven't seen any movies. Nothing is popping out right now.
Or favorite book that you've read recently?
I'm sure when we get off, I'm going to be like, oh, that's the
I don't
one.
watch movies either, so I'm kind of like fishing for recommendations here.
Right, right. I'm trying to think. And I used to watch a lot more movies before the pandemic. My son, probably every other weekend, we were at a movie. You know what? I have to watch the rest of it. I have to watch the rest of it. And this is recent. You're probably going to be like, I cannot believe you just saw this. So I didn't see Avatar when it
Oh, I
first
still
came out.
haven't seen it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So we're in
I'm
good
I'm
company.
right
All
there with
right.
you.
So right. So I still have to watch it because it's a long movie. And I tell my son, I'm like, hey, when we're going to watch movies, it has to be in the early afternoon because once the sun goes down, so do my eyes. But so I have about an hour and a half left. But that is an amazing movie. But I'm the original
Right.
Avatar because I know there's a new one
Yeah.
coming out or maybe it's out
Yeah.
already. So that was and it's cool to watch it too now, years later after it was released. But I wouldn't say necessarily it's my favorite,
Sure.
but it really I was like, oh, this is why everybody enjoyed this this movie. I don't know why I didn't see it years ago, but yeah, Avatar is a
Well,
cool
very
movie.
good. Very
Yeah.
good.
Hmm.
Well, Mariama, thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for being willing to share your
Oh,
story here,
thank you,
and I
Michael.
know that it will help.
I really do hope it helps. I really do hope it helps. Thank you so much for allowing me to share more of my story. Thank you so much, Michael. It's great to be here.
Huge thanks to Mariama Whyte for sharing her story on the show here in this episode. Please do me and Mariama a huge favor. Share this episode with someone you know who might also find some value in listening to today's conversation. Share the episode with your network. Help us spread the good word about the importance of asking more questions. And if you like the conversations with the amazing guests like Mariama Whyte that I have on each and every episode, subscribe so that you never miss when a new episode drops. If you ever want to get in touch with me, you can always email me at michael@thefollowupquestion.com, or you can go to michaelashford.com and reach out there. You can also sign up for the newsletter while you're there. I'll catch you on the next episode of The Follow-Up Question. And until then, keep asking questions.